Welcome to Something for the Turbo, the new weekly podcast brought to you by Unfound, the global platform for the travel-loving cyclist.
Well, it hasn't been weekly yet so far, has it? Apologies for that, everyone. We've had a bit of trouble and a couple of guests unable to make the show, but we're back and we've got a number of episodes coming up for you over the coming weeks, starting with a fantastic episode today. Really interesting insight into the world of wheels. Bike wheels, custom wheels, factory wheels, tubeless, and much, much more. So I think you'll all really enjoy it. Before we kick on with episode 3, I just wanted to introduce you all to a new initiative that we're running on the Unfound Hub. For those of you who don't know, Unfound is a cycling app for the travel-loving cyclist. It's a community of cyclists from around the world. I think we've got people from 144 countries on there. We also have an Asian-based sponsored cycling team who kicked off the season with a win in a team time trial today. And we're looking to start an initiative that is a little bit unique, but we're trying to build a global race team. Now, you may already have a race team. You may do events on your own, but either way, we're looking to bring you together. You can still join. You may race for another team, but you can still join the race community. And what I mean by that is that you can get in contact with us and race in our colours and do events either with us or on your own, or indeed you can get kit for your team. And what we're trying to do is really connect people together with a sense of community. So what we want to see on the hub are people competing. As I said, the team race and won in Asia this weekend, in Hong Kong. It was amazing to see cyclocross in Norway, or crit racing in North America, or racing in the UK or Australia. Australian season's kicking off, people racing in our colours there and sharing the experience with essentially your global teammates around the world. So it's something a little bit unique and different, and it's kind of hard to get your head around, but I think even if you are currently racing a team, it can still be possible. We also, moving into 2020, really want to build this community, gather momentum, but also do events whereby we can all come together from around the world and race together or ride together. So we're looking at maybe doing a long weekend in Salzburg or in Austria, or potentially going to the Tour of Phuket in Thailand. It's all sort of brainstorming at this moment, and obviously, like any team, if we can get yourselves involved in new ideas and new initiatives and new events, all the better. Ultimately, it's something new and different. And if you're interested, drop us an email, contact@unfound.cc, and we will send you size guide and costing. The kit is, well, we think it looks fantastic. It's also very well priced. So great opportunity to join the team. Now, we're on to today's episode. As I said, it's really quite a fascinating insight into the world of wheels. The sound quality, there's a couple of glitches because we've tried to there's 3 of us on the call. It's myself and Ben Sharp who set up Sharp Precision Wheels last year. Ben is a master wheel builder. He started his career off as an archaeologist, actually, before moving into the cycling industry, and he's worked at one of the most well-known wheel builders in the UK, clocking up over 10,000 hours in skilled wheel building and knowledge. And in 2018, he set up Sharp Precision Wheels, which is his own company based in Sussex. And really, they build custom, high-end, high-quality, high care, I suppose, and high attention to detail wheel sets for a range of riders. And we'll get into a lot more detail in the conversation, but having him on call has been fantastic. He's a super interesting guy. And Ben, thank you for joining us. And if you listen to episode 2, Alex Stops, who is a mechanical engineer with a huge passion and interest in all things cycling. He's also joined us from Hong Kong on the call. He's an amateur wheel builder. He's a very knowledgeable engineer. He's worked in the automotive industry, the aeronautical industry. He's worked in the cycling industry, and he's currently working in robotics, building some sort of robotic arm. Fascinating guy, and it was really interesting to get sort of Ben's knowledge and understanding and his sort of day-to-day experience of wheel building, and hearing sort of Alex's more scientific approach on things. So they had a really interesting conversation. I very much acted as the host and the layman, in terms of I have a bit of bike knowledge, but like the rest of us, it's kind of hard to figure out what's marketing jargon and what's not. But very privileged to have them both on with us. I really enjoyed the conversation. I'd love to get them back on to follow up. So if you do have any questions to either of them, do contact us. Again, that email is contact@unfound.cc. That's contact@unfound.cc. And maybe we'll do a show where we put your questions to them. Anyway, without further ado, let me introduce you to Ben Sharp from Sharp Precision Wheels and Alex Stops.
So I've introduced you both, gents, prior to the recording. But Ben, Alex, thanks both for joining today. Looking forward to our chat. Primarily, let's kick things off with Ben. Wheel building, you are a master at it, I understand. Tell us a little bit more about your business and how you got into it and the art of wheel building itself.
Absolutely. So I guess as a wheel builder, I really sit at one end of a spectrum. I've been building wheels now for about 7 or 8 years. I've certainly spent well in excess of 10,000 hours building pairs of wheels. And I started my own business, Sharp Precision Wheels, about a year ago, just to take things in the direction that I wanted to go in, to kind of indulge in being a little bit of a perfectionist for my customers and just to offer a kind of more personalized after sales kind of process.
Okay. That's great. So prior to, you were working for another wielder before setting up on your own, or is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I worked for one of the biggest hand wheel builders in the UK prior to setting up on my own, which is actually, for me, is an ideal place to learn to build wheels. You really need to specialise with wheels. There are so many variables, and working at a larger wheel builder, you get to concentrate on wheel building for a real variety of riders, and there's just no distractions, no bike servicing, no gear tune-ups, none of your normal bike shop distractions. So it enables you to have a really intensive learning process.
So you get to really specialise. And prior to sort of pursuing that avenue, I mean, we've got Alex here as well, but were you a wheel building enthusiast and then sort of pursued it, or you kind of fell into it? How did that come about?
To be honest, I just completely fell into it. I've always ridden going back 10 or 15 years. I was a triathlete. I did a lot of triathlon, and I actually originally trained as an archaeologist at university. Went on to, a real variety of projects in the UK, but also in the Middle East, working in Iraq, Jordan, Abu Dhabi, Qatar. And I really just completely fell into wheel building by chance. Too many cold, frozen winters in the UK pushed me, to try something new. So I fell into it completely by chance, yeah.
Ah, fascinating. And how about you, Alex? How did you get into wheel building? Was that just engineering curiosity, or?
Hi, Jules. Yeah, thanks for having me back on the podcast again. So I got into wheel building basically from a frustration of having too many widowed wheel sets. Basically, I've got a room full of front wheels where I've probably broken the rear wheels because they've basically been underbuilt for my weight and the type of riding that I do.
I was going to say, is that because you're a bigger rider?
I would say so, yes. We'll probably touch on it later, but a lot of the kind of off-the-shelf wheels are built basically down to a weight figure because that's what people want. They want the lightest wheel set. And if you're racing down to a weight figure, you lose out durability and you lose out stiffness and certain characteristics like that. So I took up wheel building as basically an amateur hobby just to build wheels for myself that would last.
Oh, very good. And I think I'm coming at this from obviously hosting the podcast, but also from a layman perspective. What I'm really fascinated to sort of dig into a little bit deeper, Ben, is the whole marketing spiel around wheels. And I think it's, for a non-technical person, it's quite daunting to understand which wheels to ride, what should I race with, what should I train with, why go to a wheel builder, what are the benefits? I don't know if you guys can help clear us up on a little bit around that.
I think, probably we could literally talk for absolutely hours about this. The real going to a wheel builder is in talking to somebody, explaining to them exactly who you are and what you do on your bike, and then working together to produce a wheel specification which suits that riding. When you approach a wheel builder, you're approaching an individual and a kind of craftsman. When somebody comes to me, I know that I have to build the right wheel for them, because if something goes wrong with that wheel, it's only coming back to me, which is an unsatisfying situation for me, and it's an unsatisfying situation for the rider. People who are looking at factory wheels, factories and bigger manufacturers have an acceptable rate of returns, and they just kind of swallow that. So they can be a lot broader with the wheels that they produce and who they produce them for.
So I think the challenge or the hurdle to get over is, if you've only ridden factory wheels, you probably don't know, and that's, I'm sure, as setting up your own brand, that's the biggest sort of marketing challenge for you. You probably don't know the benefits. One of those things, you don't know how good it is until you've ridden wheels that have been made for you.
That's absolutely true, but it's also important to say that factory wheels do a good job for a certain sector of the market. There are a lot of riders out there who are enjoying factory wheels with no problems with them whatsoever, and the wheels are doing a really good job for them. The problem is perhaps that we're all very different these days. Some of us are 60-kilo climbers, others 200 kilo guys who still want to go out and thrash a gravel bike around. The factory market can't possibly cater for that broad spectrum of humanity.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And so, when would you say when should someone embark? I mean, it's interesting because with Unfound, I drew a graph that sort of plotted a cyclist's career. So when someone first gets into cycling, they're a complete novice, they're on flat pedals, and the curve as you sort of get more into cycling, various things happen. You start doing events, and then you know start riding with a team and shaving your legs, and there's definitely a curve as you get more into the sport. And certainly from an Unfound perspective, I think we're sort of at the sort of far right hand end of the curve. When should someone come and speak to a wheel builder? What part of that journey, or when on that journey, should they come and say, okay, I've been using factory wheels, I'm doing some racing, or I'm thinking about doing some gravel? What part of the journey should they come and have a chat and say, okay, what more can I get out of the wheels that I'm using?
To be honest, I think once you're through that initial phase of going, being a new cyclist, and you're starting to think about training plans, you're starting to get more regular with your riding, and you're starting to really understand what you enjoy doing on your bike. That's the time at least to start thinking about pairs of wheels, and just thinking about talking to a wheel builder. Changing the pair of wheels on your bike is probably one of the best upgrades you can possibly make as a first upgrade, on that first road bike or gravel bike. And so relatively early on, it's something you can do to make sure that you have less stress in your riding as you move forwards, perhaps, and rack up some more miles. And something that you can do, just as a little psychological boost for yourself, to enjoy riding your bike a bit more.
And on a personal level, what are your favourite wheels for you? What do you absolutely love, or what do you look out for, or what do you try and get out on it for yourself? You mentioned you're a triathlete, but what kind of riding are you doing at the moment?
Yeah, so at the moment I am, purely on the road. I absolutely love going out and just riding up hills in Sussex, Devil's Dyke, Ditchling Beacon, Stenning Bostel, anything with a bit of gradient to it. I love just going out and flogging myself up a hill. But I'm looking to get a gravel bike, and I'm looking to get away from the road. I think, like a lot of people, the traffic situation has just got too much for me. Riding for me is about relaxation, and about switching off a little bit from work, and about stresses in your personal life. And going out on the road at the moment has become more stressful over the last few years. There's just too many cars, and I'm looking forward now to just getting away from it all a bit.
Okay. And so building a gravel wheel, how does that differ? Obviously wider. Talk us through the sort of specifications around what you'd be looking to do if someone was looking to get a gravel wheel set from you.
Definitely. So gravel wheel sets, you're 100% looking at width of the rim, and that goes hand in hand with what size tyre people are kind of anticipating running. Whether they want to run tubeless or with inner tubes still. I'd say that the vast majority of gravel riders are running tubeless, and with a larger tyre, sort of 32 to 42C, tubeless system works quite well at very low pressures. You've also got to look at durability. Spoke count of the wheel, in my personal opinion, is not a great deal of point in going for ultra low spoke count gravel wheels. The wheel's probably subject to more stress than it would be were you riding out on the road. So a few extra spokes in there helps to share the load of any kind of impacts. And just a reliable hub, something that you don't have to worry about too much, something that's well sealed and take a little water, a bit of mud, and carry on going with kind of minimal servicing requirements.
Okay, any examples of hubs particularly that you like for gravel?
Best gravel hubs, to be honest with you, DT Swiss are doing a fantastic job.
Yeah.
There are positives and negatives to every hub out there, but what I look for is something which technically builds a good wheel, builds a stiff wheel, so you have a good balance of spoke tension between each side of the wheel, and something which you don't need to fuss over. DT Swiss hubs have no preload adjusters to worry about. If you want to service them, you can service with no tools. The free hub body just pulls off, give it a good clean out in there with a microfiber towel and a regrease, and it's back together. Compare that to a lot of other hubs on the market, which may be better in other areas. They're just a lot easier to live with.
That's interesting. And what about you, Alex, in terms of the riding and racing you do? What wheels do you have at the moment, and where are you thinking about going with your wheel decisions or selections in the future?
Well, I go through phases of what wheels and what combinations of rims, hubs and spokes that I like. But for me, I think the most important part of any wheel set actually for me is the spokes. And I don't think off the peg factory wheels put enough emphasis on quality spokes and getting the spoke count right. And as I touched on before, I think a lot of manufacturers are trying to outdo each other in terms of low weights, just so they can put it on the ad online, and people will buy it if it's 20 grams lighter. But if you take a 20 front hole and a 24 rear hole rim, 20 and 24 spokes, then if like me or over 80 kilos, you do like steep climbs at low wheel RPM, then often those number of spoke counts isn't really adequate. Now, why did I say about the wheel RPM and the steepness of the climb? So if you're doing 400 watts on the flat and the wheel is spinning very fast, the torque on the rear wheel is very, very low. If you're doing 400 watts up a climb and the wheel RPM is very slow, the torque is huge. So then it becomes more important. So if you're a climber and you're heavy and you put a lot of torque through the rear hub, the spokes and the number of spokes become really important. And when I'm building wheels or looking at wheels to buy, if I'm buying factory wheels, I always look at spoke count, and I will not go lower than 28 on the rear, because I just find the stress in the remaining spokes is higher and they fatigue more, and I just break spokes. So I won't build anything with less than 28 in the rear. But at the moment, I'm riding my disc brake road bike quite a lot. It's actually quite interesting to see the rims. I can go deeper on the rim section for the aero benefits, and actually they're not too heavy because they don't have the rim brake track, which essentially is a thicker wall basically than you need on the carbon rim. So the wall thickness of the carbon rim near the tyre can be a little bit thinner, and so I've been experimenting with deeper wheels on my disc brake road bike. But on my rim brake road bike, I like to still have a nice light, very simple wheel set. I don't like anything too flash. And again, I think the most important thing for me is the spokes, because I travel quite a lot with the bike in the bike suitcase. And one thing that might really scupper you on a ride if you're out in the middle of the countryside somewhere in a foreign country is if you break a spoke. It's not often something you can fix at the side of the road easily. Like, how many riders do you know that aren't doing Audaxes that go and take spare spokes out on the ride? Like, I don't know any. And if you break a spoke and the wheel won't pass through the frame or fork, it's kind of game over. Try and get a taxi or something home. So spokes for me is really important in the wheels. And
just very quick,
I always
just a quick question for you. When you say quality of spokes, you're talking about the spoke count rather than the actual material of the spoke or the actual spoke itself.
Both, exactly. Both very important. So the spoke count needs to be matched to the rider weight and the style of riding in terms of torque, not necessarily power, because as we touched on before, power on the flat and power on the hills in terms of torque is very different. So let's say you live in Holland and you ride flat at 40 k's an hour all day, but you're putting a lot of power out. Actually, the torque on the rear wheel is very low, because the power speed equation in torque, you can't change physics, it's just an equation. But if you're doing the same power up a very steep climb at low wheel speed, then the torque increases. It's just to match the equation. So the number of spokes is important to distribute the load, and also the type of spoke. There are some cheap spokes that come on factory wheels, and there are some more high-end spokes that come on factory wheels like DT Swiss, Aerolite, or Sapim CX Ray. So I always build with Sapim CX Ray because they have one of the highest fatigue lives of any spoke. So what does that mean? It's like how many times you can stress the spoke before it snaps, basically. Everything has a fatigue life. Those two types of spokes that I mentioned generally have a very high fatigue life, so you're unlikely to snap them if the wheel's built properly and the number of spokes is correct. So that's why I choose them, just for reliability purposes. The hubs, I always tend to stick with something quite simple, something that's easy to service. And the rims, again, if you're not braking on them, you can use carbon. There's no real drawbacks apart from the tolerances might not be so good as aluminium with the spoke drillings and stuff. Yeah, with the rim, with the disc brakes, it frees up the rim design a little bit. And I just going back to what we touched on offline before, I think a lot of it comes down to education. So when people look at getting a hand-built wheel off someone like Ben, or thinking about doing it themselves, maybe they don't actually know what the end goal is. And Ben said the word, which I'd like to point out, is the most important word for me, and it's specification. So I'm an engineer, that's my day job, and before I design anything or before we build anything, you form a specification. Now, when you're looking at buying factory wheels, there is no specification. The only specified point basically is the weight, and within the other kind of characteristics of the wheel, they're all very similar. So it's like the brands are forcing the consumer just to choose by the weight, and the cycling media doesn't help either, because I guarantee if you read any wheel review in any online cycling magazine, you'll read the two biggest cliches in wheels, right? It spins up well, which is complete rubbish because they've all got bearings in the middle, and something like they hold their speed. And I just think those are just the two most uneducated cliches that people read that and they think, okay, that's the characteristics I have to look for in a wheel, and it's just not what it drives me mad. It's not what we should be looking for. We should be looking for stiffness, reliability, serviceability of the hubs, the type of bearings that are used in the hubs, because some wheels use very cheap bearings which won't last a season in wet conditions, and some of the really high end wheels can use, like, SKF bearings, for instance, which are top grade engineering bearings. And these are the little details that we need the media to be reporting on, not they spin up well, because it's round and it's got a bearing in the middle. Of course it's going to spin up well. You wouldn't buy it if it didn't turn. So yeah, those are just a few of the things I look for and what I'm riding at the moment.
And what would you add to that, Ben, in terms of particularly the spoke thing? That's quite interesting for me. Is that something that's a big focus for you? Are you on the sort of same wavelength as Alex in terms of those views?
Yeah, I've got to say, it's actually it's nice to hear Alex, say those things, to be honest with you, because it's quite hard to actually educate people about this, quite hard to make people understand, and he's hit the nail on the head completely. It's very difficult to coax people towards slightly higher spoke count wheels. So for riding in the UK, I would say a road disc wheel set should have, ideally, with a shallow aluminium rim, 28 spokes front and rear, and that's almost regardless of the size of the rider. And the reason I say that is just because the roads are so poor. I mean, if I was riding fresh tarmacked French mountains, fine, a 24 spoke disc wheel might be appropriate. But for the majority of people in the UK riding on massive potholed roads, 28 spokes is a more appropriate number. The wheel will be more durable. If you do have an impact, the load will be shared by a greater number of spokes. You'll reduce the chance of completely wrecking the wheel. Also, spoke selection for me is very important. I do vary the selection of spokes, the thickness and gauge of spokes, depending on the characteristics I want, from the wheel. So stiffness, he mentioned, is incredibly important.
Oh wow! Okay, that's I didn't realise that. So you'll sort of vary them per wheel, or
I'll vary them per wheel, depending on the weight of the rider, even depending on if he wants to run tubeless or not. So if I am building with a hub, for example, that I know has a slightly, a worse distribution of spoke tension in the rear wheel, something like a Chris King hub, for example, the design and geometry of the hub lead it to have a very low non-drive side tension. So if I'm building a low spoke count wheel and I know that the rider wants to run tubeless, I will probably suggest that they run a slightly heavier gauge of spoke in the rear wheel, because I know that the tubeless tyre is going to exert a lot of pressure on the rim. It's going to drop that spoke tension even further, and it could lead to a wheel which is, much less stiff than it ought to be, all for the sake of a few grams, with a slightly heavier spoke.
That's fascinating. And I think both of what you've just said, I think this is part of the challenge, right? Is I think just people don't know or don't understand the science or don't understand the intricacies, and they get swept up in the sort of broader marketing, and it comes back to, okay, I think people want to learn more, but where do you go to find out more? And that's where I think people get lost. And I think just hearing you talk in terms of how you build and the intricacies and the considerations, I would say a lot of cyclists out there aren't even aware.
I think you're absolutely right. The thing is, there are so many variables to consider. When you are trying to come up with a specification for a wheel, you need to consider the height and weight of the rider, the type of terrain they're going to be riding on, the size of tyre they want to run, whether they want to run tubeless or with inner tubes. Even aesthetic properties are important to people. The look of a bike is really important to a lot of guys. And yeah, there's just so much to consider. I think approaching a wheel builder is a good chance for you to, conduct a sort of audit of your own riding, and it might help you move forward as a rider in understanding where you want to go with that riding.
Yeah, very good. Well, I mean, we can do it now. So obviously, I'm just moved back to the UK. I have disc brake bike, and I also have a rim brake bike, which I'll probably ride through the winter. It's a Cannondale CAD 12 last year, lovely orange frame. But I was thinking about getting some winter wheels or sort of more durable wheels for sort of winter riding and potentially the odd commute as well. What are your thoughts around, okay, height-wise, I'm 182 centimetres. Weight-wise, I'm probably 78 kilograms at the moment. I'll put you on the spot there, but what would you be thinking as a sort of build build for something that's pretty durable over the winter for a CAD 12.
Absolutely. So hub wise, I'll definitely look at something like a DT Swiss 350 hub, potentially a Hope hub. I feel like the DT Swiss hub is a little bit more elegant looking than a Hope hub. The star ratchet mechanism in the DT Swiss hub is extremely easy to service. You could genuinely do it yourself at home, no tools, just a little bit of the correct grease. The hub's got a good geometry as well, comparatively. So I know it's going to build a relatively stiff wheel, and it's going to give you just no problems over the winter, effectively. It's a little bit heavier than a lot of hubs out there. There are a lot of wheel builders using cheaper hubs, Bitex hubs, Novatec hubs, things like that for winter wheels. I would argue that they're not really up to the job, and that fair enough, a DT Swiss 350 hub might be 80 grams heavier for the pair of hubs, but you will have significantly less issues with it in the long term. Rim wise, if you really...
Sorry, I think of my weight's not the major consideration when you weigh 78 kilograms.
No, absolutely. Rim wise, if you really are going to crucify these over the winter and you are going to run them in all weathers, which would be, we're into real traditional training wheel territory here, then I personally don't think it's worth spending a lot of money on rims. There are some good rims out there with relatively thick, wall thicknesses of aluminium. Stuff like the DT Swiss R460 rim is pretty good. It's not a fussy, it's not a fussy thing. It's a 40 quid rim, and if you're going to go out there on salty roads and put in the miles over the winter, there's no point in spending 80, 90, 100 pounds on an alloy rim, because it is, the rim is a consumable item in a handbuilt wheel, and especially in a winter wheel. You have to view the rim as a consumable. Spoke wise, again, if this is going to be a winter wheel, just a round double butted spoke, something like a Sapim race spoke. Someone like yourself, Jules, I know you think of yourself as heavy, but you're really not. You're a perfectly normally sized guy. 24 spokes on the front, 28 on the rear would see you absolutely fine through the winter. If you wanted ultimate durability, then yeah, 32 spoke front and rear wheel. That's what I used to ride on a rim brake road bike through the winter in the UK. I put, almost 10,000 miles onto a set of wheels like that one winter. And for me, 32 spokes front and rear isn't a problem, but 24, 28 would be absolutely fine for you.
Okay, cool. And say we built that up. I mean, what would you recommend from a tyre perspective then? Is that part of the wheel, the tyres you use as well, or are you just sort of spoke, hub and rim?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I do make tyre recommendations to riders. I do supply tyres with my wheel builds, and I also recommend tyre pressures to each individual rider based upon their weight, the size of tyre that they're going to be using, and the width of the rim that they're going to be running. I think, especially with tubeless now, tyre pressure almost has become a little bit of a minefield for people. Rims are much wider than they used to be. You can realistically run much lower tyre pressures than you used to. I guess 10 years ago, I was running 23C tyres at 115 PSI on my road bike. Now I'm running fives at 80, 85 PSI on a wider rim. So yeah.
Okay, cool.
I'm happy to advise, yeah.
Yeah, so for that wheel particularly that you sort of mentioned there, what tyres would you sort of lean towards?
Something like a Continental Grand Prix 4-season. The 4-season tyre, it's got great puncture resistance. The rubber compound on that tyre is the grippy black chili rubber compound. If you go towards the kind of gator skin type tyre, those are tougher tyres in respect to puncture resistance, but the rubber compound they use is not quite as grippy. The tyre carcass is not quite as supple, so you don't get quite the ride quality from it. But yeah, a Grand Prix 4-season from Continental will be great. My personal opinion is that on a road bike with a 23 or a 25C tyre, you will not feel a massive benefit from going tubeless. You are better off sticking with an in-tube, which is much easier to change should you get a puncture out on the winter roads.
Superb. You've nicely led to my next question, because we put in our weekly email the article that you put together with regards to tubeless. And I don't know if you guys have seen on the hub this week, there's been a lot of debate around tubeless on road bikes. That article has been hit multiple hundreds of times this week alone. So it's prevalent for everyone at the moment coming into the winter. I know both of you have got quite strong views on this. Let's open that can of worms. Tubeless tyres for road bikes. Where do we stand on it?
I'll take this one. I think above 30C, I think you're fine with tubeless, because I've done the calculation, as Sean Kelly would say, and below 30C, 28, 25, 23 just doesn't work. Ideal gas law, no, I won't get into that, but basically the pressure's too high, the volume's too low, the pressure forcing the cut in the tyre open is too much in anything below a 30C, I think. Yeah, it works fine in mountain bikes. I used to use it in mountain bikes, and I wouldn't ever use tubes in mountain bikes. But then you're running, a 2.6 inch tyre at 20 psi, 25 psi, and there's not much pressure there, so it's easy for the sealant to fill the void in the tyre. Now, for the road, it would be great if we had developed sealants that were set to work at a much higher pressure and a much higher hoop stress. And hoop stress is basically the pressure in the carcass of the tyre pulling the cut apart when the tyre's under pressure. But we don't. We basically have like universal sealant, and it doesn't really work under those high pressures. That's my experience. I've tried it on road bikes with 23mm tyres. It definitely didn't work. I had some success at 25 and 28, but I could only get the tyre to seal reliably when it's down to 40 psi. Now, if a tyre's at 40 psi on my road bike, if I had a tube in it and it was at 40 psi, I'd take it out and fix it because I don't want to ride at 40 psi. If I hit a pothole, I'm going to hit the rim. If I hit a stone, I'm going to pinch it. So I'd rather get it back to optimal operating condition, 90 psi and carry on and not deal with the mess, because I've had so many messy incidents with tubeless and sealants and trying to get them to work. From my opinion, under 28 to 30C, it just doesn't work.
I think you've absolutely nailed it. When I wrote the article that I wrote, I think I was expressing the thoughts and the views of a lot of wheel builders out there. Tubeless road has been promoted by the industry as being this absolute cure-all for every road cyclist. And the fact of the matter is that for some people it's going to work and it's going to be okay, but for others it's absolutely not the direction to go in. And I do recommend to people running 23, 25, even 28C tires. You're not going to feel the full benefits of tubeless. With rim width being the way it is these days, you can run a much lower tire pressure in a regular inner tubed tire, and you get some of those benefits without having to go tubeless. And the sealant just doesn't work at high pressures. I've been a mechanic on a lot of sportives in the south of England, and I spend most of my day there putting inner tubes in tubeless tyres for people because they've not sealed and they ride.
Oh, that's interesting to hear. I think the other side of the argument, reading some of the comments on the hub this week, is the fact that people are saying the technology's there, it's better, you should try it. I'm with you on both your gentlemen's arguments, given your knowledge and experience. But I think obviously the technology is improving. Do we see it getting there at some point? Do we think that tubeless will be the future if the technology can be improved?
I think the main area of development is kind of a two-pronged attack. I think there needs to be a unified standard for rims and tyres, and I think there needs to be a lot more development done on the sealant. Now, I think the first thing I mentioned is probably the easier thing, and it just needs one manufacturer to come out and really nail it with the tyre and rim interface. And I can imagine that being on the tyre side Continental, and on the rim side probably Mavic, because they kind of did a UST standard before, I think, for mountain bikes. I think that originated it. And in mountain bikes, it does work, but you still have problems in mountain biking of blowing the tyre off the rim because of the interface. And now we're looking at things like inserts and foam cores and stuff, to protect the rim in case you do get a complete blow off. So it's still not quite ready. Obviously, the demands of a mountain bike tyre and rim are, the lateral forces are much higher in especially sort of free ride and downhill mountain biking, but that's really at the extreme end of the scale. But I think the main area of development is the sealant, and this goes back to automotive applications as well, because if you compare the sealant that we're using in our bike tyres to automotive tyre sealant for tubeless car tyres and truck tyres, stuff like that, it's very similar, but it's a very hard thing to do because you need this. The viscosity of the liquid is very important. So if you've got, let's say, a high pressure, low volume road 25C tyre with sealant inside it, the viscosity needs to be low enough so that the fluid can travel to the cut quickly so you don't lose too much air. But if it's not viscous enough, it won't stick in that cut and form a plug. So it's actually really hard to get right. You need it runny enough to find the hole and get there quickly before you lose too much air. But then if it's too runny, it'll just spurt out the side if the cut's big enough. So the sealant is really, really tricky to do, and a lot of sealants kind of have a shelf life, and after a while they dry up inside the tire, and it depends on where you store your bike, the humidity, because tires and tubes they're not hermetic, they're not airtight. So water can pass through rubber and butyl, air can pass through butyl and rubber as well. So all these things need to be taken into account to develop the sealant, and it's a really, really hard thing to nail. And even there are automotive and commercial truck sealants that aren't perfect, even in their own industries. So for us to deal with it at low volumes and high pressures of 90 psi is really tricky. And I just want to go back to the pressure and volume thing. You've got, let's say, a mountain bike tyre running at 20 psi. You've got a road tyre running at 100 psi. So you've got 5 times the pressure in the road tyre and maybe a fifth of the volume. So it's such a hard thing to do in road compared to mountain bike, because the parameters are completely different. So you've got 5 times the pressure and maybe 5 times less volume. So get that air sealed before it starts coming out, and then the tyres at too low pressure is really hard. And I really can't see it. Certain things in nature you just can't change, right? It's like the dodo became extinct because it couldn't fly, and then it got preyed upon. So I just don't think it's going to get. It's not going to get off the ground.
It could be a phase
That's my opinion.
for road cycling anyway, so it may not survive.
I think so.
Alex, we spoke a few weeks ago, and obviously the podcast was meant to be a weekly thing, and we will be picking it back up as a weekly thing. But we had a bit of a sabbatical for a few weeks, so we're sort of relaunching with this one. But if you haven't listened to the conversation I had with Alex, do go back and listen to it. It's very interesting. We talked about the future of wheels and where that may go. I'd be interested to get your thoughts and Ben's thoughts on that in a little bit more depth as well. Just give us a bit of a recap, Alex.
So to recap what we said in the previous podcast about future of wheels, I said I'm surprised there are not more full carbon monocoque wheels out there. Now, we do see some in the mountain biking, and I think there's some road applications. Obviously, like a disc wheel or a tri-spoke TT wheel is a monocoque wheel with basically solid spokes that don't need to be tensioned. They're not wire wheels as such. But I did say at the time, this goes against Ben's livelihood. This is his job, to make spoked wheels from steel spokes and rims and stuff. And it's a modular system. And the problem with that you do face with a carbon monocoque wheel, the manufacturers that are doing it, I think it's called Spengel. So if anyone wants to go and look at what I'm talking about, look up Spengel wheels and you'll see a full monocoque carbon wheel. But then literally, then there's no customization. It's one size fits all. You've got one rated stiffness which you can't change. If you're a very lightweight rider and the wheel's built really stiff, it's going to beat you up. It's not feel comfortable. So I think in terms of mass production and aerodynamics, those two things could be really honed for that type of production. But if you want a customized wheel, like Ben will do, you really can't get past the modular system of a separate hub, separate spokes, and separate rim, because it's like a tailored suit. You can really tailor it to your specification with a full monocoque.
So
wheel.
Ben, just before you jump in on this, because I've had a bit of a think about this since our conversation, Alex. I think basically with the wheels that you're proposing, it kind of exasperates the situation we have with regards to factory wheels in the current market. So while they could be improvement in wheel quality and performance for particular kind of riding, be it racing or whatever, given the diversity of riding that we're seeing now, with more people doing gravel and different types of riding, it may mean that there's a bigger scope for more different types of wheels, and actually it's just going to be another line of wheels that may take over for road racing, but ultimately Ben's custom wheels for gravel and winter riding and different types of riding are still going to be the way forward.
Yeah, there's one. It will be one type of wheel fits all, and there's no customization with those type of wheels. So if you don't like the stiffness and if you don't like the characteristics and the way out of the box, then you're stuffed basically, because you can't,
what do you think,
can't
Ben?
change it.
I think Alex is right when he says, if you don't like the characteristics of that type of wheel, you are stuffed, really. I think it can be easy to look at a kind of spoked wheel, a hand-built spoked wheel, as being old-fashioned, but you can't deny the kind of ride quality that you get from using that spoke at high tension. A thin gauge of spoke running at a high tension, the ride quality you get is going to be completely different to that full carbon wheel. So I'm not particularly concerned about losing market share or being left behind by kind of full carbon monocoque wheels. I think they look kind of cool, and for a very select few, they might be the right product. But I think there's still product development in respect of rims and hubs that we can do to produce a better hand-built wheel.
So where do you think the hand-built wheel world is going to evolve to?
I think, as a wheel builder, my obsession is in building a tighter toleranced wheel for every individual. It's not just in selecting the right components for that person, because you can select the right parts and then still put them together badly. But it's in exploring areas of product development that will enable me to build a better wheel. So that means producing rims which are better manufactured, so that I can build a wheel with more even spoke tension. I guess areas that we could look at are 3D printing rims. Theoretically, you should be able to build a rim with no joins, no uneven carbon fiber layup, no uneven extrusion. You should be able to build a more evenly balanced wheel as a result of that. Hub development as well. I think the majority of bicycle hubs at the moment are hubs that have been adapted throughout the last 10 to 15 years. Disc brake hubs, for example, we've settled on a kind of 142 by 12 rear standard on disc brake bikes now. Most of the hubs are adapted from 135mm hubs, and I think a kind of ground up approach to hub design, starting from fresh, could lead to some interesting new hub geometries that might help to build stiffer rear wheels with more balanced spoke tension. And those are areas, that I would kind of look to in the future to produce better wheels. For me, it's purely about producing the tightest tolerance wheel that I possibly can for someone, because I know then that it will last longer.
Very cool indeed. So I've got a question for both of you individually. Obviously, I'm very excited. I'm going to Harrogate this week for the World Champs. Looking forward to all of those races. But I'm just going to ask you to firstly predict a winner for the elite men's time trial and then the elite men's road race.
Ooh.
And for the road race, what wheels, if you could, would you put that chosen rider on? Ben, go for it.
Oh, okay.
No pressure.
I'm just looking up the course.
Emergency looking up the course. So what wheels in the road race?
Yeah, well, pick a time trial winner first. Who do you think will win the men's elite time trial?
I'm torn now.
That's hard.
Patriotism versus reality.
Alex, any views on the time trial? You are the time trial machine.
How long is it? Tell me how long it is.
You're going to do the stats, are you?
I'm looking at. I want to know how long the TT is.
Yeah,
so it's pretty hilly. Who I don't know who's riding. Well, if he'd not just won the Vuelta, I'd say Primož Roglic, because that course would suit him perfectly. Victor Campenert's riding. Okay, he's my pick.
What wheels would you have him on?
60 mil deep front wheel, not a tri-spoke, and the back.
Yeah, I can't argue with it. Yeah, I was about to offer up, actually. You mentioned what wheels would a pro rider, ride. It's difficult, obviously, because they have to ride whatever they're sponsored with. They don't really get too much choice unless they're sneaky with putting stickers on things.
So I've heard. So I read a few articles with pros basically not enjoying their wheels for the year, and it's a big thing, right? They really don't like it, and obviously they support the sponsors and stay on brand. But the whole hiding behind stickers and stuff like that, is that true? Have you heard examples of that?
I've definitely seen examples of it, and I've been a part of examples of it, perhaps in the past. And certainly been a part of supplying wheels to pro riders for things where they are kind of allowed to ride their own kit. Things like the Olympics, you have a lot more choice over what you ride. And so, I have in the past been a part of supplying, kind of bespoke wheels to pro riders who are doing the Olympic road race, for example, and want something a little bit special. Yeah, so it's definitely a thing. It happens. It even happens at the Tour, definitely. Riders will, even if they have a pair of wheels built just to stick on the roof of the team car, just for kind of insurance, if you like. It definitely happens.
Wow, that's very interesting. Very interesting to hear. And who are we picking for the men's elite road race on the Sunday?
Can I just chime in, TT? Yeah, Dennis. Because I think he's hungry. He's come back with a bit of anger. He's not riding his Merida. He's come back with a different bike of his own choice, which will be labelled up as something else. And yeah, I think he's actually pulled out of the Tour. I think he's basically just being eyeing up.
So.
This
Yeah, I read an article here the other day, and he was sort of. I mean, what happened at the Tour? Because he kind of sort of brushed it under the carpet, but obviously something significant happened.
I actually don't like the way he treated whatever happened. I think it was pretty bad. It was pretty disrespectful to the sponsors, and he kept saying that he didn't publicly slag off any sponsors, but just the way he wouldn't give any explanation to his team and his teammates and the media, I thought was pretty disrespectful. I mean, you think of how many young guys would love to be in that position. I think it was maybe there were deep rooted reasons and some kind of some mental issues which helped him walk away from that race in the middle of a stage. But I think there's a certain maturity that's required of a pro and someone in the spotlight to have, and I think he let himself down a little bit. But I don't know what happened still. I don't think he's come out and said he actually specifically blamed one thing. I think he said it was a build-up of things, but I don't know what they were.
And who are we picking for Sunday's men's elite road race? And that's another lumpy course.
Well, listen,
right?
I wanted to be romantic. Isn't Geraint Thomas riding?
He is, yes.
That's why
he is. He's another shout for the TT. Actually,
I was toying with patriotism, head versus heart, effectively, and I'm going G in the men's road.
Very good. And what wheels would you put him on if he wasn't sponsored? You could choose
something punchy. Like Alex has already touched upon, stiffness would be incredibly important. Aerodynamics are important, but so is stiffness and power transfer. 45 mil deep, 50 mil deep. Aero rim something quick engaging with the hub, and yeah, just something nice and stiff and punchy.
Very good. Who are you going for, Alex?
For the road race, I might say, I think I'd like to say Van der Poel, but it's a long race. I think it's 284 kilometers, right? That's more, for me, that's more of an Audax. But I would say Van der Poel, no, I don't think he's got the distance. I think Alaphilippe might be a shout.
Yeah, Milan San Remo.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. And what about the ladies?
Yeah.
The ladies are a great race.
Or, no, I've changed my mind again. I'm going to Philippe Gilbert.
Okay.
Because he was really strong in the last week of the Vuelta.
Yeah, very strong.
And there was a couple of there was that lumpy stage that finished in Bilbao, which I think was great training for him to win this World.
And for the ladies, any thoughts on that? I think it's going to be a fantastic elite women's race.
Who's going to win the ladies?
Vleuten?
Yeah, no idea, to be honest. Absolutely no idea. And I should take more notice of women's cycling because, the racing is...
I'd go with Annemiek van Vleuten.
Sorry, Ben, I think you were about to say the racing is fantastic. It is, right? I absolutely love it.
The racing is great, and I think myself included, I don't watch enough women's cycling. It's as simple as that, and I don't know what's going to change that for me. And I'm being brutally honest. That's just the way things are for me at the moment. If I'm lucky, I get to keep up with the men's because I managed to catch a few minutes of highlights on ITV4 in the evening. Yeah.
I think most keen cyclists actually love watching elite women's riding. It's fantastic. It's very exciting, often fantastic races. Part of the issue is we just don't seem to get the coverage. It's hard to go out, even in the written press, to find the coverage. It's getting better, but hopefully that will continue.
I think watching the women's racing is more exciting than watching a lot of the men's races.
Yeah,
it's more unpredictable. The kind of DSs and the riders, they don't to stick by the kind of traditional rules of they see the road book, they see how long the stage is, and if it was a men's race in a Grand Tour, you could kind of write the ending before they've even left. But yeah, the girls racing can be really exciting. But I think for the ladies, is Lizzie Deignan riding?
I don't know. She's certainly been back racing. I suspect she will be.
I'm not sure, actually.
It would be really nice to see women's cycling in the same direction as women's football is going at the moment, to be honest. Better wages for riders, increased media coverage. I think, women's football in the last year or two has made huge strides in just representation to the public. It'd be great to see, women's cycling going in the same direction.
Yeah, I agree. I've been quite surprised at the women's football, soccer side of things, just having been out of the country for 9 years and come back here. It's genuine as well. It doesn't feel like it's a token thing. There's genuine interest in it, and there's genuine media coverage, which is fantastic.
100%. And the quality of the play will only accelerate as a result of that media coverage, as a result of women being able to actually earn a fair wage playing football. And I guess likewise with cycling, the more professionalism we see in it, and the more the public can engage with it, the faster the development it will have as a sport.
Yeah, professional cycling for me, I think something's got to change just in terms of a business model perspective. I can't see how the way it's structured at the moment, both the men's side and the female and the women's side, how it's sustainable. And I think that while it's great to have Ineos come in and put 65 million euros a year, whatever it is, I think it's more than that in, it just stretches other teams to a point that it's going to be unsustainable at some point. There's only so many firms that can write off that kind of budget in terms of a marketing spend. So at some point, I think the whole structure of cycling will have to change and evolve if it's going to carry on in the way it is. that was a conversation stopper, wasn't it? Okay, Ben, both of you, thank you so much for joining today. Ben, before you go, where's your favourite place in the world to cycle?
French Alps. Anywhere in the French Alps on a sunny day, no traffic. Yeah, love it.
Can't beat it. And have you know the Alp Cycles guys, don't you? On the Hub, have you met those guys?
I do know the Alp Cycles guys very, very well, and they know me very well. If you want to go on a cycling holiday and you want to be able to relax and you want to be taken around the best climbs and just perhaps experience a little bit of what it's like to be a professional cyclist, yeah, definitely look up Alp Cycles. They're the absolute best in the business out there. Yeah,
they're great. Hopefully we're going to have AD on the podcast once his season quietens down a bit. So I'm looking forward to catching up.
Well, that will be a treat.
Well, yeah, it should be. I'm looking forward to it. Very good. And Winter Wheels, I think what we'll do is I'm very keen to chat with you further offline about getting those Winter Wheels. And I think it would be good to come back to the podcast and let everyone know the experience I've had, obviously buying wheels with yourself and how I find them, and then maybe when we get to spring we can talk about some race wheels for next year.
Definitely look forward to it.
Brilliant. Thank you both very much. Any other questions, Alex? Anything?
No questions. I just think, I hope you now, Jules, like when you're looking at wheels and forming a specification in your head, I hope now you have a bit more of an appreciation of what we're talking about, and not
I do massively. I think it's been a hugely interesting conversation, and you know what? Sometimes I think there'll be a lot of people out here listening, and they'll know in their heart of hearts that there's more to their decision making around wheels, or there should be, but still you're swayed towards the weight only thing or getting a bargain on or whatever. So I think hopefully this conversation will help with the education process. Certainly for me, I want to try and get a set of wheels from Ben, and that'll be my sort of first foray into it.
I think for me, just one quick question I'd like to fire to Alex before we wrap things up. We talked a lot about spokes and future wheel development. I wondered if, just from a materials perspective, you've got any opinion on the kind of emergence of things like the bird, which are I guess they're kind of composite or fiber spoke, which is just like a string, like a piece of material almost.
Are they the white coloured ones?
Yeah, exactly.
What look like white fabric? Yeah, I think there's some kind of Kevlar composite, like woven material. Essentially, they should work in exactly the same manner as a steel spoke, because a spokes always work under tension, as you know, and even when you have when you put compression into a spoke, it's still be in positive tension. So if you've got a material that's very strong in tension, which will never see what we call a buckling load in engineering, actually something that's completely floppy in compression, like a piece of string, will work absolutely fine. And I think the production method is not there yet, and essentially it's very hard to build these wheels, I think, by hand to lace them up and true them. But one positive thing over that kind of fiber material is that it essentially has an infinite fatigue life. And that's one of the great things about carbon fibers and Kevlar fibers, is if they're, especially a carbon fiber composite with epoxy, if it's laid up properly, you can consider it as having an infinite fatigue life. Whereas a steel spoke, like a Sapim or a DT Swiss, you look at the data sheets on the website and it will tell you the fatigue life under what loading. So steel, unfortunately, or anything metallic, does have a fatigue life. Titanium is probably one of the better materials out there that has the most resilient fatigue life out of all metallic alloys. Some titanium alloys, that's why it's used so widely in aircraft structures, because it just pushes out the service intervals of the aircraft, and that's more time in the air and more money. So titanium's widely used. I don't think titanium's a great solution for a spoke, because it's quite hard to draw out into thin wire, and it's not that stiff. It's not as stiff as steel. So you'd need a much heavier gauge titanium spoke to do the same job as a steel spoke. Then it's less aerodynamic, and it just wouldn't catch on, and it's quite expensive as well. But those fibers you mentioned, the only thing that when I look at those, what I worry about is when you were a kid and you had a brand new white pair of trainers with white laces, is getting the laces muddy. That's what I worry about, is having them go yellow or brown the first time it rains.
Nobody wants that. You won't look half as cool. Yeah,
exactly. But no, theoretically, going back to the theory of it, so long as the spokes are always in tension, then they'll work absolutely fine. They'll never see minus tension or compression unless you have a seriously heavy. The problem is if you have a seriously heavy impact, and let's say the rim deforms and you lose all the spoke tension, then it has no structural integrity at all. So the rim would literally just fall apart in one.
Yeah, I think the tension really is my main concern with them as well, just in terms of a spoke made from that material. It would seem to me as a builder, it would need to run at very, very high tension in order to perform. I suppose with a lot of,
yes, exactly.
11-speed road rear wheels, rim braking, for example, a non-drive side of the wheel runs at a pretty low tension, and I'd be concerned that the spoke
it does
perform at that level.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's why they would probably work great on the front wheel, because you've got equal spoke tensions. And Jules, just before we wrap up, I think we both were waiting to mention this, but the geometry of road hubs, particularly on the rear, is really flawed at the moment. And we've got into the situation where the whole industry is dealing with like legacy geometry that we've been stuck with. Now, if you built 20 years ago an 8-speed rear hub, in terms of mechanical integrity and stiffness, you have a better wheel than we have now, because we've now crammed up to sort of 12 gears on the same geometry for a road quick release size. And what that's done is push all the dry side spokes inwards, and the angle of those spokes is a lot straighter down towards the hub. So you need a much higher tension on that side to get the same lateral pulling force as you do on the non-drive side. And as a result of that, the non-drive side in some hubs can be really too low. And then if you couple a low spoke tension with a very stiff spoke, it becomes really hard for the wheel to stay true, because you need a certain amount of stretch in a spoke, and if you don't have a certain amount of stretch in a spoke, then the nip always comes loose. It's exactly the same as using. So if you look at a car, the cylinder head on a car, it has huge, very long, almost foot-long threaded studs to compress the cylinder head down onto the engine block. And the reason why they're using it so long is because the nuts will never come loose. So it can take a lot of stretch, and any vibrations or any thermal expansion from the engine is taken in by that stretch, and the nut won't come loose. If that thread is then very stiff, i.e. very short, can kind of be the same thing, and it's easier for the nut on the end to come loose. And it's the same with the spoke. So if we keep having like modern hub geometries where we need to have a low tension on one side, you cannot use a stiff, thick gauge spoke on that side, because it will come loose more often because there's not so much stretch in it at a low tension. So, and this is all left over from us cramming on, 11, 12 speed cassettes onto the same type of hub. We just need more space. So we've pushed one of the spoke flanges inwards, and it's created this big asymmetry. And when you're building wheels, if someone said to me, like, you can build front wheels all day and they're symmetric, I love building front wheels because it's easy, but I always always build the rear wheel last, because I like to get the nice easy bit done first, because that's the enjoyable part. And then building a rear wheel with an 11 speed cassette and the modern geometry we've got is always a headache. You're always battling to try and get the non-drive side into tension and trying to get a little bit more tension into it, so the wheel will last a bit longer and it is a bit stiffer. And like Ben touched on earlier, we really need a ground up redesign of rear hubs. So the drive side and non-drive side are symmetrical, the spoke tensions will be even, the wheel's going to last longer and it will feel better. But it's going to take a very bold manufacturer to come out and try and invent a new standard. And I know there's some Cannondale mountain bikes which use a rear hub geometry which I think is symmetrical, or more symmetrical than what we've got now, and they've actually tried to balance those spoke tensions and solve the problem. But it's not going to, or it hasn't caught on. It's proprietary, but I wish someone in the industry said, right, we're going to redesign 11 speed hubs, 12 speed hubs, so the spokes are more kind of aligned in terms of their.
That sounds like a challenge for you, Alex.
Oh, it's not a challenge, it's really easy, mate. It's really easy, but it requires completely new standard. It needs all the frame builders out there to change their dropout spacing. It requires a lot of, it's a lot. The solution behind it is simple, but it's trying to pass it through, which is the difficult part. And we're so far down the road now with developed of, like SRAM's XD hub body, and we've got really good at cramming loads of cogs onto a hub that's too small, is how I can put it.
Would you add anything to that, Ben?
I'd say, yeah, Alex, in terms of designing a better hub, he would certainly be able to do that. And I think, yeah, the tricky thing then for a lot of people is to actually manufacture it. I think you might assume that a bicycle hub is a relatively simple object. Certainly stuff like a DT Swiss hub doesn't have that many moving parts. But to actually have it mass manufactured at the correct tolerances for it to be reliable is actually a pretty difficult thing. And there's certainly a lot of manufacturers who haven't managed to get there in the past, who have released hubs that just don't really work very well. And it's harder to have these things made than you would imagine to the right tolerances.
That's exactly right, because if you take into like one of the probably the best performing lightweight decent value hub out there is what a DT Swiss 240, and I use it quite a lot on wheel sets, and I've built a few wheel sets of friends using it. And the DT Swiss, I think Ben said earlier, it doesn't use a preload adjuster, which is nice for us because we don't have to deal with preload and servicing the preload and setting it. But what that means is the tolerances in manufacture have to be spot on, because the axle spacing and the bearing seats, the widths between the bearings inside the hub have to be spot on. Otherwise, when you assemble the end caps and put it in a bike, it could bind. with certain other hubs like Shimano hubs, where you've got angular contact bearings or cup and cone bearings, you can take out any manufacturing tolerances by just tightening the adjusters a little bit. So you really don't have to worry about the axle length or the bearing seat positions too much, because they have a preload adjuster and that's set by the user. Now, some people like that to adjust the preload, and it makes it very easy to service at home and stuff. But with hubs that don't use a preload adjuster, like DT Swiss that use cartridge bearings, like, people have to realize that it is really hard to get those tolerances repeatable every single time. And we're talking within 10 microns, 0.01 millimeters of distances between the hub spacing, the bearing spaces and stuff like that. And it's easy to do it one off on a lathe. If you take, you could make the hub shell on a lathe. If you took a day to do it, you could probably do that. But to knock, I don't know how many thousand out per day or week in a factory and have it repeatable is really good. And they do last. Like, the DT Swiss hubs don't go through cartridge bearings. If you get, Ben touched on earlier, Bitex is a very cheap Taiwanese hub that a lot of wheel builders in the UK like to use because they can build a cheap wheel set with it. Now, the front hubs I've got on really well with, but the rear hubs, the bearing layout is similar to a DT Swiss, but they haven't nailed the tolerances. And the consequence of that is the bearings last like couple of months before they're shot, and there's loads of play in the bearings. It really takes a lot of time and investment and nailing down the tolerances of the tooling, not just the hub, but of the tooling that makes the hub, to make it repeatable. That's why if I'm building a hub with like cartridge bearings, so sealed bearings, then I'll always use Swiss.
It's been a fascinating insight, both of you. Thank you so much for taking the time. I think we should probably start to wrap up, given that we've been on the clock over an hour now. Alex, firstly, thank you so much for joining us. Ben, let's chat off air about my winter wheels. Stay in touch, keep posting on, keep spreading the word, and yeah, let's reconvene in a couple of months and see how we're all getting on. Brilliant. Cool. Thanks for your time, both. Have a brilliant weekend.
Cheers, Jules.
Thank you, guys. Cheers, Ben, for your info. Great.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks for listening. Please subscribe to the podcast. And more importantly, don't forget to download the Unfound app and join cyclists from around the world on the Hub. We'll see you on there.